Looking for a way to power all your favourite electrical appliances you run from home while on the road? These Hardkorr Pure Sine Wave Inverters are going to help you do just that. Here's how to install an inverter into your setup. Let's start by getting some bits and pieces together. You're going to need your inverter kit, some nice gauge cabling with an inline fuse, heat shrink, terminal eyes, a smaller cable for earthing, mounting screws, and P-clips for cable maintenance. You'll need some tools too: a Phillips head screwdriver, drill, socket sets, cable crimps, and a heat gun. Before you start, here are some things you're going to need to think about. Make sure you're starting with a fully charged battery. You'll need to check your battery's continuous discharge rate too. As a rule of thumb, the continuous discharge rate should be about 100 amps for every 1000 watts you're going to use from your inverter. If you're running a larger inverter, you may need to use multiple batteries, but just make sure to check your battery's manual before installing. Don't skimp out on your leads and fuses. You'll want to make sure you're using some really good size stuff. We've got a guide in your inverter manual which will tell you exactly what gauge and size fuses you'll need to suit your setup. The last thing to consider is where you're going to put your setup. Put the inverter in a place where it's not going to see too much vibration or movement, in a place that's dry, won't get too hot, and is safe from fumes. You'll also want to make sure that there's a good amount of ventilation, limited dust around the inverter, and that it's not too far away from the battery. Note that AS/NZS 3001 guidelines state that your inverter and battery should not be mounted within the same enclosure. Today, we're going to be mounting everything in the back of this canopy here. It'll all be on show, but this is only for demonstration purposes. The plan for this one is simple. The inverter goes through a fused positive, the negative goes through the shunt, then we go to the battery. Now that we've got all our bits and pieces together, it's time to get the inverter installed. Start by taking the terminal covers off the inverter, then connect the positive lead, then the negative lead to those terminals. Before tightening up your negative, you'll need to ground the inverter. To do this, grab a short negative lead. Then crimp a 5mm I terminal on one end and an 8mm on the other. It's then just a matter of putting some heat shrink over the connections. Now, after we've done that, grab the 8mm terminal eye from your grounding lead and place this over the negative terminal on the inverter. You can now tighten everything up here. Thread those terminal covers back over all your leads and then you can screw those onto the inverter. You should now be able to fasten the earth lead onto the inverter's grounding point, which is found on the bottom mounting flange. Now let's get the inverter into place. Start by getting a couple of screws and get those fastened onto your desired surface to suit the mounting holes on the bottom of the inverter. This makes it really easy to just rest the inverter onto those two screws and then you can fasten the inverter into place. We'd recommend running your inverter through a battery monitor or shunt. Now, if you're going to do this, it's just as simple as mounting that shunt into place and running some large cabling from the shunt to the battery. After you do this, just keep in mind the length of wiring you're going to need from your inverter. You can now connect the positive lead from the inverter, as well as that small positive lead from the shunt, and connect that to the battery. Once you've got your positives wired in, mount that fuse straight onto the wall. Connect the negative from the inverter into the shunt. While you're doing this, don't forget your earthing lead too. It can be pretty normal to see a small spark when connecting the negative to the shunt, but it's nothing to worry about. Cable management at the end is an absolute must. You can secure your leads into place using those P-clips. Now that we've got everything wired in, let's make sure it's all working properly. Start by turning the inverter on, then test that RCD switch. But just make sure to put the switch back to the up position. The inverter also has an automatic transfer switch, which will run the inverter through an AC input when detected. This is going to save your 12-volt system from being discharged. To get this running, it's as simple as using the included IEC lead, plugging it into the inverter, and then getting the other end into a compatible 15 amp extension lead or straight into a power point. It's like one you'd find at a caravan park. The inverter also comes with a remote, which is pretty handy if you've installed the inverter somewhere where it's hidden away. This simply plugs into the RJ port on the inverter, then you can run the remote and operate the inverter up to 5 meters away. The screen on the 2000 and 3000 watt models are going to tell you what's coming in and out of the inverter. You're now ready to use the inverter, which is as simple as plugging in your appliance and using it just like you do at home. Just make sure that your appliance is within the inverter's wattage range. If you want to run multiple appliances at the same time, it's easy. You can use either the multiple outputs on the inverter or run through a power board. Again, just make sure that the cumulative wattage of your appliances is equal to or less than the inverter's capacity. Now you're all sorted. That's power wherever you need it. For more information, check out the inverter's user manual or contact our support team.